Hi, my name is Fadzayi Mashiri. I'm the Livestock and Natural Resources Advisor for UC Cooperative Extension, covering Merced and Mariposa counties. For today, I'm going to give a presentation covering Worksheet 4, titled Pasture Range Assessment, which is part of the Range Water Quality Plan. And filling out this worksheet and others in the plan will contribute towards you completing your overall plan. This worksheet is mainly focused on evaluating your operation or operations for water quality concerns. So let's move on and actually take a look at the worksheet. This is how it looks. It's a fairly simple form to fill. It is a series of yes and no questions that are grouped in sections or themes. And the main goal is to identify potential locations and sources of water quality impacts from sediments, pathogens, and nutrients. Before you go through this exercise, I would want to recommend that you go back and review the information about the fate and transportation of these different pollutants that we're going to discuss about today. It is important to understand that Worksheet 4 and 5 should be completed earlier on in the process of developing your overall plan. And these two forms will provide you with fundamental information and direction to address water quality management concerns and opportunities. So I'll try and work through these questions, giving you examples, at least to make it easier for you when you actually undertaking this process to answer questions for your range situation. So moving on, the first section focuses on sediment, and this section addresses range, pasture fields, and roads, and how those two can contribute sediment to the waterways. So we are mostly interested on potential sources of sediment that can be transported to streams and rivers from rangelands, pastures, or range roads, and how vegetation cover and management actions can protect against raindrop impact and soil erosion. The first subsection under sediment focuses on range and pasture questions on pasture fields. The first question, is there bare soil, and is the bare soil visible throughout the rainy season? So essentially, you're looking at your rangeland. Does it look like what we're seeing in this picture, or does it look like what we're seeing in this picture where there's vegetation that's germinating and the soil is covered? So if there's bare soil, you'd answer yes, and then if the soil is covered or there's germination, you'd answer no. As you go along, it is important to realize that management is not always the reason for bare soil occurring on landscapes. Reasons like fire and drought can also contribute to bare and visible soil conditions in given years. In that situation, it will be really important to take note and keep record of such events as they occur and the conditions that are existing on your landscapes. The second part of this section focuses on presence of erosion features on the landscapes. The first one focuses on smaller scale erosion features, and it could be real erosion or sheet erosion. Real erosion is where you have channels of less than 1 foot wide going through your landscape, and this could occur on hill slopes or throughout the pastures themselves. Whilst sheet erosion is the broad removal of topsoil from the landscape. So you'd select no if these features are not existing on your landscape, and yes if they do. And then moving on to larger scale landscape level erosion features. You'll be looking at, are there gullies, slumps, or headcuts that are existing on your landscape along the hillsides or the hill slopes. Though it is important to here also understand that there could be underlying geological and soil reasons that might result in these conditions, as well as road drainage. So take note of where these features occur and take your time to note the relative contribution of landscape conditions and management, because this will help you in the next steps of your plan to prioritize projects and mitigation measures. This section focuses on assessing sites and sources and how management can make a difference and document the role of natural and historic landscape conditions that are beyond management's role and ability to control some of these issues that we're discussing. Right here, I want to draw attention to the last column, causes. And in this section, there are 3 options for what could be the causes, designated by C, H, and N. As you can see here, C designates current livestock management, and H is a historic legacy of the site. And with this, it could be management or practices that were done by previous owners or generations that are currently creating water quality concerns. And N stands for natural causes, and this could be issues like wildfire or drought. As you can see in this example, we selected H and N, which means our historic legacy issues and natural causes were the reasons for the presence of gully, slumps, or headcuts. Let's move on to the next section, which is roads. And this section looks at road condition and drainage characteristics. The first question in this section is, do the road surfaces themselves have rills and gullies? The next question is, are culverts and ditches causing gullies and erosion downstream? And then, is there sediment deposited and filling drainage ditches after storms? Going back to examples, here where we answered yes, it is an indication that roads are potentially contributing to sediment delivery to streams. And you can also see in the location area where, or in this location section where you are identifying the different locations where you have seen that as a problem. Let's move on to the next section, which talks about pathogens and nutrients. This section is also divided into two subsections: livestock distribution and manure and compost management. The focus is to understand the potential sources of pathogens and nutrients that may impact water quality. The concern from a management perspective for the livestock distribution subsection is not whether there's animals grazing on the rangelands or landscapes. The focus is more of where the animals congregate or concentrate, either due to management reasons or animal behavior. Let's now move on to the livestock distribution questions. The first question in this section is, does runoff from corrals connect directly to streams and rivers? Because of the large quantities of manure around corrals, if there's runoff from those areas, there's likely going to be high concentrations of nutrients and pathogens washed into the waterways. So we recommend redirecting the runoff across the pastures away from the waterways to allow the water to soak into the soil and use plant cover to filter out manure and sediments. It is important to keep in mind that some of the infrastructure features like corrals and barns were historically placed on flat grounds near waterways. Please take note of this and mitigate as necessary. Going forward to the next question, the corrals used throughout the winter season. Although this may be necessary for your operation, it is important to be aware of the fresh manure that's present during the rainstorms and make sure that the runoff is managed to prevent direct delivery of pathogens and nutrients to the streams. The next question is, are supplemental feeding and water sites located near water streams or rivers? If so, a common practice is to place attractants that cause livestock to concentrate away from a stream to take advantage of the filtering capacity of pastures to reduce nutrient and pathogen loads. The last question is, do animals congregate in streams and rivers? As you can imagine, this is the worst case scenario because the animals are depositing fresh manure directly into water sources, and the recommended mitigation measure would be to at least place water points and attractants away from streams to reduce the concentration of manure and resulting pathogens and nutrients in the watercourse. So here the goal is to at least be able to answer no to most of these questions confidently. However, if you have answered yes to one or two of these questions, it is important at least to just understand that there are management options that can be put in place and practices that can be done to mitigate the potential sources and pathways of nutrients and pathogens to streams and rivers. Let's move on to the last section, which covers compost and manure management. This question is about where manure and compost are stored. And the question reads, does runoff from stockpiles connect to streams and rivers? The recommendation is to redirect runoff away from waterways across open pastures to allow water to soak into the soil and use the plant cover to filter out manure and sediment. The next question focuses on when the manure is applied. And the question is, was the compost and manure applied to pastures less than 2 weeks before storms that generated runoff? Research recommends applying manure or compost 2 weeks or more in advance of rain events that will result in a runoff to provide time for pathogens to die off and nutrients to cycle, reducing the levels of both available for delivery to surface water. The last question is, was manure and compost stored less than 1 month before it was applied? So this question focuses on the treatment of manure or curing of manure before its application. And research has also shown that manure that is at least 1 month old or older has less pathogens and nutrients due to curing that can be transported to streams and rivers. So the goal here, just like before, is to get to a point where at least we can answer no to most of these questions. And if yes, acknowledge what the problems are, identify the causes and the locations for those, and take appropriate measures. The takeaway message is, while you go through this process, pay attention to your management and landscape characteristics, and also take into consideration historical factors, including management and natural events, and just try to evaluate how these factors are contributing to some of the issues that you might have identified while you're filling out the worksheet. And I want to emphasize the importance of range maps, having those in hand while you go through this process to make notes of sources and locations of potential water quality impacts is really important. So I would say the main goal for a landowner is to be able at some point to answer no to most of these questions, which will mean that your contribution to water quality impact is limited for those questions that you answered yes. So you'll be good to go in those areas. If there are any that you answered yes, this means that you need to follow up in your plan and explore options for mitigation measures to address those sources and locations to protect water quality. And moving forward, the next step from here would be completing Worksheet 5 stream assessment, which helps you identify priorities for water quality management along range streams. And by completing these 2 worksheets, Worksheet 4 and 5, you are well on your way to completing your entire plan.
You can find more informative presentations covering ranch water quality topics on the UC Rangelands website, and look for the Water Quality Information Hub or direct your web browser to the URL shown on this slide.